Welcome folks, my name is Tom Beatty. I'm the chair of the Web Design and Development program at Newmont College of Computer Science, and today we're going to do some JavaScript programming. Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about mouse events and event listeners in general. We've got a little bit of setup to do before we get started in this, but if you'll follow along, the payoff I think will be worth it. So let's start out by going to our index.html, and I want to go ahead and connect to a CSS file. So I'm going to say link href equals, we'll call it style.css, rel equals, and this is a style sheet, and that's a self-closing tag, so just put a space slash and close your tag, and that should be all we need to load our CSS file. Let's actually create a basic one right now, style.css, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I'm doing, but this isn't really a lesson on CSS, it's JavaScript. If you want to learn more about CSS, you can go online, do a Google search for it. Hopefully soon I will create some CSS tutorials as well. So right now, just to test things, I'm going to change the background color of the HTML page. And so I'm just going to say background-color, and I'll use the shorthand. So octothorpe or pound symbol, whatever you want to refer to it as. And I'll use AAA there. Hashtag pound, whatever. Anyway, so if you've got everything working, you should be able to refresh this and it will change this to a nice light gray. Alright, let's do more. Now I want to add some buttons, and I could just add some HTML buttons, but I actually like to use divs, and then I can style them the way that I want. And I'm going to give this one an ID of myBTN1, and I will make it part of the class button BTN. And we'll just say this is button 1. And go ahead and copy that entire line, paste it. Button 2, button 3, and we'll make sure that it says on it button 2, button 3. Save that, and if you look at it now, it's just going to say button 1, button 2, button 3. These are all just divs. But let's make those look more like buttons. There is, as I mentioned before, an actual button element. I usually don't like to use that because it's comes pre-styled in kind of a bland format, and I would rather just create something from scratch. So in my styling here, I'm going to put a period because I want to modify everything that is part of the button class. So the period says that this is a class, and button is the name of that class. And you might recall in our index, all of these are part of the button class. So anything I style here should modify all buttons, or all things that are part of the button class. So background, change the color to, let's make it a dark blue, and then the text on it, we'll make that white. Width, we'll make them all 170 pixels. Height, let's go 30 pixels. When you roll over it, we'll change the cursor so it looks like a pointer, so it acts more like a button. We'll make it so that you can't select the text accidentally that's on the button. We'll give it a padding of 10 pixels, margin of 5 pixels, font size of 24 pixels, font family, let's go, let's just do Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. It'll be Arial on a PC, Helvetica on a Mac, and sans serif if the machine doesn't have Arial or Helvetica. It'll use just whatever the default sans serif is. Text align, center, so it centers the text on the button. Border radius, we'll say 12 pixels, which will round the corners. Border 5 pixels thick, it will be solid, and we will make it white. And then, I guess, just to make it a little more like a button, let's do a period btn and hover, so when you hover the mouse over it, it will change our background color to be slightly lighter blue. Alright, that's my CSS file. I'm not going to do anything more with it. If I refresh now, oh, look, I got 3 buttons. They even kind of look like buttons. The magic of CSS. Okay, let's go back to our index.html. I want to add one more thing in here. I'm going to add an h1 tag, and I'm going to give that an ID and call it my header. This is some text, and we'll use that later. Okay, let's go into our script.js, and let's make it easier to target these so that we're not doing document.getElementById every time we want to use these. Let's go ahead and create some variables to hold them. So we've got my header, my button 1, my button 2, and my button 3. So I'm going to say let my header equal document.getElementById my header. Now technically you don't have to use the same variable names that you used here. I find it easier so that it makes more sense when lining it up. And so let's see, I had my button 1, and that targets my button 1. Some coders would get on my case about doing all this cutting and pasting, but we're just doing basic stuff here. So okay, so we've got all the different elements, their IDs, and we are storing them in these variables so that we can easily target them if we're going to change the inner HTML or something else that we're going to be doing a lot of here will be adding event listeners, and I'll talk about that soon. Well, actually I'll talk about that right now because I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to say my btn1, and I'm going to add an event listener. Now an event listener is basically telling the computer, all right, I want you to listen for a particular action to happen, and when it does, then do something. In this case, we're going to listen for a click. If someone uses the mouse and clicks on button 1, then run this function. And the function we're going to run, we'll call it, I guess, handle click. So now we need to actually create a function called handle click. So I'm going to say const handle click equals, and we're going to pass in an event, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Then in the curly braces, this is what's actually going to run. And so I'm just going to say, let's do something simple. Let's change my header dot inner HTML to equal button 1 has been clicked. I save that. Let's try this out. Make sure I hit refresh. Here's my text. If I click on button 1 has been clicked. So what's happened here is we've told the computer, always listen to see if button 1 has been clicked. If it has, run this function, which will then change the inner HTML of my header to be button 1 clicked. And I could very easily put in button 2 here and tell it to handle click. And if I wanted to, I could put in button 3. The problem is my text here is just saying button 1 has been clicked. So if I run this, if I click on 2, button 1 has been clicked. Well, that's not really true. Button 2 has been clicked. And if I click here, well, this text is already changed, so it's button 1 has been clicked, even though button 1 was actually never clicked. So let's take a look. I'm going to console log this EVT, or event, that I'm passing in. So if I now click button 2 here, that changes, but then all this other information is in here about a mouse event that's happened. If we open that up, we can see there's a ton of information. There's even information about a target, which refers to some div called myButton2 that's part of the button class. I can open that up and I can see that there is lots of information. Oh, and there's even the ID of it, myButton2. And that's sitting inside of target, which is all part of this event. So if I were to come in here and instead of just saying event, let's console log event.target.id, and that gets the ID of whatever was clicked. So I can refresh this. I hit button 2 and it says button 2 was clicked. Hit button 1, it says button 1 was clicked. Hit button 3, hit button 3 is clicked. It's returning the event. And you don't have to use a console log. We're certainly able to put that right in the inner HTML. If I used backticks here, for instance, then I could do $, curly braces, evt.target.id. Now I used EVT. I could name this anything. When there is one parameter from a event listener, that one parameter is going to be the event. Often people will use EVT. Sometimes you'll see that they just call it E, or sometimes they will write out event. But I'd say the most common thing to see is EVT, and that's what I tend to use. So I'm going to save this now and refresh. And if I click here, my button 1 has been clicked. My button 2 has been clicked. My button 3 has been clicked. And I could just as easily put like some if statements or a switch case to do different things when different buttons are clicked. And so that's up to you. Now, so far all we've seen are click mouse events. There are others. There are several others. I'm going to show you a couple that are also fairly common. Like you could do a myButton2 addEventListener, and I'm going to put a mouse over in here. And instead of going to a whole separate function, I'm just going to embed my function right in here. I'm going to pass it in as a parameter. And so I can do that just by putting my event, doing my arrow function, and it's actually a parameter of my addEventListener now, instead of having to load something from the outside. And let's say we'll change my btn2 inner HTML equals hello. And I could copy this entire thing and paste it. Oh, btn2, keep that as it is. Mouse out. Oh. Goodbye. So, when we mouse over btn2, it's going to constantly be listening for that event to happen. But when we do it, it's going to change the inner HTML of btn2 to hello. And then when we mouse out, it'll say goodbye. So we refresh, hello, goodbye, hello, goodbye. But that doesn't interfere at all with the click listener. That still works just fine. We've just added some additional listeners. Then maybe with my btn3, I add event listener, and I can add a double click. Same thing, I'm going to pass in my function directly in as a parameter. And maybe when you do a double click on my btn3, it's going to change the inner HTML of btn1. So we'll have it say, wow. So I refresh, I click on btn1, btn1's been clicked, btn2, I've got my rollover, btn3, I click, it says btn3 is clicked, but if I double click, it now changed the inner HTML to wow of btn1. Okay, so hopefully you can see a lot of uses here. Now, I'm doing this on a div. You can apply these to just about any element. So think about the possibilities there. So that's mouse events. Practice with them. There are other mouse events out there. You can do a search online, but these are some of the more common ones. All right, if you like this video, please hit subscribe. Subscribe to my channel. I will provide more content in the future and keep it entertaining for you. Thanks a lot.